Hey everyone, you're watching Gen Z News Insider, the show that's all about providing a platform and to empower the voices and the stories of Gen Zs from around the world. Now coming up today, we're probably going to be covering one of the most neglected groups during the pandemic, and that is university students. Almost a year ago now in March, students across the UK have been given an unexpected shock of their life when they had to close down campus and they had to have a drastic change, which is to start studying from home in terms of continuing their degrees. And since the first lockdown in March in the UK, a lot of students across all universities across the entire country have felt like they've been neglected by both their universities and by the government. But the negative impact of all the lack of support that university students have just been given throughout the whole pandemic. Now I've gathered 5 university students from across the country who are going to be talking about more of these issues in more detail. And the first question I have for them is, what aspect of university do you feel like you've missed out on the most, and do you feel like your university has been doing much to compensate for this?
Something that's cropped up a lot is the lack of university experience that students are receiving, especially students that are in their first year of academic study. Many of them would normally join societies, join organisations, meet people from different backgrounds and cultures, and all of this has been made increasingly difficult over Zoom to make those connections with your peers and to make friends. And that's something that students are frustrated with at the minute because they haven't been able to have that university experience that so many of us have received during our time.
I think most people would agree with me when I say I think it's definitely the social aspect of university that I miss the most. Having that real, down-to-earth, genuine connection, having that conversation, that daily conversation. But now I'm speaking to my four walls. University lecturers, module leaders, they're doing so hard and they're replying so quickly to any of our emails, to any of our questions. And you can tell they still want to give that valuable, high-quality degree, education, higher education.
Definitely the social aspect. This hasn't been the same at all. Obviously, most societies are still running, but they're doing it via Zoom or Microsoft Teams or emails, but it can't possibly be compared to what socials were before this whole pandemic started.
I'm fortunate enough to be in my 3rd year of university, which means that I've already made my main group of friends. However, I do still really miss that social interaction, whether that be society events or just a quick catch up with my friends between labs and lectures. The university have put on a lot of virtual events, whether that be a quiz, a virtual bake-off or fitness sessions such as yoga.
Definitely meeting a diverse range of people. You know, right now I'm very limited in terms of, for example, people that I've met the most are either, obviously my flatmates, but also people via my course. And that has been all right. I really enjoy that. I really value those interactions because without it, I don't know where I would be right now, especially, the fact that I'm lucky enough to be able to have those interactions via seminars, etc. However, it's hard to meet people outside of that scope. For example, normally that would be available through events or through societies. And whilst those have transferred online, it's still tough to form those long-lasting relationships where, in person, you can just go up to someone, speak to them for, a few minutes, and you can instantly gauge whether, you really like speaking to them or, they might not be a vibe. And not being able to have that interaction, that diverse sort of those diverse interactions, I think that's definitely the one aspect of university I've missed out on the most. The university, especially within the course, have tried their best to allow students to meet each other or, for example, whether that be personally through my course, there's been a ton of group projects. So I've been able to meet quite a lot of people through there, and that's actually been a blessing in itself. Some things are taken out of the university's hand. For example, they have to follow certain restrictions.
Thank you for that, all of you. And from what I've gathered, it seems like that a common pattern that university students are missing out the most is that's the social life. Because in the end of the day, and we can't deny it, that the social life is a big aspect of the university experience. And yes, we are lucky enough to live in a generation where we have access to all this advanced technology, where we can easily Zoom call our friends and peers and have online lectures, and we have platforms where we can do our work in education and study. But I think this whole experience in the pandemic has taught us that no matter how advanced technology can get, no matter how many good features we have to live our lives in a remote environment, that experience of having a real human interaction is something that can't be replaced, and it just hits differently. Now, the next thing I want to cover is how universities have been dealing with mental health issues for students in the UK. From what I've seen, universities and their students' unions have been doing a lot to make sure that they're looking after the well-being of students throughout this time. But I want to know more in detail in terms of what are they actually doing to make sure that they can give that support in the same level as they did before the pandemic. So I'll pass you on to them now, the speakers.
The university has a range of services available for those who need extra support during the pandemic. Some of these include putting on events, having a free advice centre run by the SU Open. There's also Nightline, which is a student-run listening service available throughout the night. There's also the wellbeing services where you can access counselling and extra support, and each department also has their own way of supporting students. So you could have a tutorial system where you have a pastoral tutor or a buddy system within a society.
Some universities are definitely trying to make a proactive effort to help students who are really suffering with their mental health. I mean, isolating in accommodation buildings if people are stuck at university, or being at home and being completely separated from the university buildings and the resources that are available on site, is really tough on students right now. And I know that a lot of universities are really trying to get it out there on social media, that they're offering resources, or here's some links to resources that to do with mental health, like Samaritan helplines.
I feel like my mental health and well-being is being looked after because we're always reminded about Nightline and all these other services that are available for everyone 24/7. And it's just that reminder that you're saying you're not alone, we're here for you. And that's really nice. It's really welcoming, definitely approachable. I think that's one of the best things the union has achieved throughout its whole history. Its services and its approachableness, I would say.
Many universities, speaking to people at my university and speaking to others at other universities around the country, many wellbeing services have been very flexible during this time, offering extensions for assignments and essays if any students have any mental health issues during this time. The TAB actually reported that last term, 39 ambulances were called to student halls, to university campuses, based on mental health and suicide alone. So the mental health crisis at universities is something that many students are now suffering from. However, wellbeing support at my university has been offered for virtual drop-in sessions for people to arrange a time to speak to wellbeing support.
You cannot be, face-to-face or, that kind of personal interaction. And I think the university lacked in that specific area. And this was evident for me, especially during when I had COVID and I was in isolation for 2 weeks. And this is really a tough time because, again, this is just starting off my university life. And throughout the entire 2 weeks, no one really checked up or gave, like, for example, food parcels or anything like that. It was very much you were left to your own. The only thing that the university did do was occasionally call up to ask how we were doing, but that seemed very scripted. It was very much, I could almost predict exactly what they were going to ask, and they never really lasted more than a few minutes. And it seemed almost as if they were just doing it to tick a box, rather than actually genuinely concerned about our well-being. I think that almost epitomized what the university has done in relation to mental health and well-being, in terms of they have those resources there, but the quality of that is a bit questionable.
Okay, cool, well spoken from all of you. Now the next thing I want to talk about is something I already touched on briefly, which is the fear of unemployment for university graduates and the fear of not being able to pursue their dream careers. For we've seen that so many companies are having to make their staff redundant, and across all sectors, no matter what sort of industry it's in, many workers, whether they're young or experienced older ones, have been made redundant and lost their jobs due to the pandemic, simply because companies just can't afford them anymore. And I know someone, but I won't mention their name specifically, where they've actually dropped out of their course and they're going to start a new course in September simply because they just feel like the pandemic has ruined their initial industry, and they feel like moving on to another course will just give their employability a better chance. I've already asked these guys how worried are they in terms of their futures, in terms of pursuing their careers, and do they feel like the pandemic is going to affect job opportunities and finding placements and internships for them? And how worried are they in terms of being able to find the career that they want? Here's what they said.
The job market is certainly very competitive right now, and one of the main contributing factors to me doing a integrated master's, as well as the extra qualification, is that I can graduate a year later. However, many companies have been able to offer a lot more students virtual internships. If you have a laptop, these are more accessible as you don't have travel costs and things like that. There are also more places on these internships, so there's a lot more opportunities out there for students.
Obviously, it is not ideal graduating in the midst of a global pandemic, and this might be a setback for people, but I would take every opportunity that comes to you. Don't let this get in the way of what you want to achieve in the long term. Use this time wisely. Make connections with people virtually. And if you put your mind to it, you can achieve anything, and you will. And if you have that motivation and determination to get there, then you won't let this pandemic get in the way of achieving your potential.
There's also been a massive amount of online, virtual, at-home opportunities created specifically for people who haven't been able to find an in-person real-world job. And not to say that those who have opportunities online aren't real world, of course they are, but they're more accessible for those who have just graduated, who maybe live on a different side of the country but have an amazing opportunity in London and they don't live there, and there's no way they can commute due to the restrictions or anything like that.
I actually did a module on this about the graduate market in the future, and upon further research, it's crazy how scary it is. I looked at statistics saying how many hiring managers are actually going to delay or pause graduate recruitment. People that are about to enter the job market or graduate now are going to have such a difficult time finding a steady job. My internship that I applied for last year was cancelled. I'm actually in the process of looking for placements right now. There's just not many opportunities. Like, the graduate market is already competitive as it is. Just take a step back, relax, and just analyze your areas of strengths and weaknesses and really hone those areas and just use them as your advantage.
Right now I'm very much set on a few particular routes. Whereas after the pandemic, judging how the situation is, I may even switch into something that I would have never ever expected to go into. I think that is probably why I'm actually quite optimistic in terms of what the future holds. I think it's given a reality check to quite a lot of us that traditional routes and paths may no longer be sustainable. And it has opened, especially for the GenZ community, I think has opened that entrepreneurial spirit. And either way, whether that be a specific job or whether someone starts their own startup or business, I think this current pandemic has widened our horizons. And for example, myself, again, I've gotten involved in a startup, and that has been an absolutely insane experience for me. And I wouldn't have gained the skills that I have today without them.
Now, regarding exams, we've seen that GCSE and A-level exams have already been cancelled for secondary school students. But university students, on the other hand, have been given very limited information in terms of how their examinations are going to be held and if that's going to affect the overall degree in their grading system. And this has caused much anxiety for a lot of students because they feel like that it's going to be an unfair grading system because they can't achieve their full potential in these circumstances of them only working in their bedrooms, in their accommodations, where they have limited access to resources on campus. So here is what my speakers have already said in terms of how their grading systems have been dealt with at their university and if they feel like it's fair or not.
For me personally, I'm fortunate that this new exam system will probably help my grades reflect my true potential. I'm not great at memorising large amounts of content, such as facts or references for essays. And so by converting my exams into coursework, I feel that I can show my true understanding of the content and my wider reading without having that barrier of memorisation.
Reflecting on last year when I was in year 13 and the A-level debacle from the algorithm, almost screwing everyone over, to be fair, as it did with me, and then the U-turn to predicted grades, teacher assessed grades per se. I think this is really more relevant for the current year 13s as there's so much uncertainty right now. I think one thing is for sure that there will definitely be an element of unfairness as during this pandemic, a lot of students haven't been able to prove that they've been improving since the year before, and that is actually quite unfortunate because, you know, according to resource things that are available right now, the teachers will be assessing those grades, and the teachers haven't been able to truly be with their students for an extended period of time to kind of gauge that information.
Grading and marking systems are already one size fits all. It's incredibly difficult to, I would say, assess whether grading systems can be fair, because the question you should really be asking is, have grading systems ever been fair in the first place? So, but I am worried that there will be, on the system that they will be using to mark, it will be somewhat biased and somewhat unfair, because it's, I looked at a study, it's the people from a lower social and economic background who will struggle the most from COVID-19. It's people who have to pick up jobs to support their families who may have gone redundant. It's the students who have to look after their children because their parents may be look after their siblings because their parents may be working overtime. It's lower socioeconomic households that will struggle the most, and it's so obvious, and it's sad because they may not have the right access to books, they may not have the right access to laptops, technology. And because of this, I feel like it's incredibly, incredibly important that universities understand that there is a gap. There is a gap in terms of equality in the grading systems, and there's always going to be that gap. And I think it's the responsibility of universities to shorten that gap.
Obviously, that is a huge factor of universities determining whether they want to accept certain students. And of course, we had that issue last year of grading not being at all fair, or it was very biased, and unfortunately a lot of students suffered from that. Some issues were rectified, but I know a lot of students who really didn't do very well because of the situation they were put in, and I'm really hoping that this year will be a lot better, but I'm slightly concerned that it's not really going to be that much different to last year. And they have announced that teachers are now going to be able to kind of provide a grade based on what students have been doing during the years. This may be another problem that students may have to face and that the government may have to deal with a lot quicker and sooner, and kind of make a more established plan.
Lastly, the next thing I want to cover is the big question. Is university even worth it at all anymore? And it's just made university students question that even more now with the pandemic, and that they still have to pay $9,000 a year for online university. So here are their thoughts in terms of if university is worth it anymore and if it's even worth our time.
As someone who potentially wants to go into the field of research, it would be incredibly difficult for me to do this without a degree. I feel that I've learned so many skills that will help me in my future work, whether that be analysing papers or actual physical laboratory skills. So whilst I may not be getting the same value for money as I would be if I attended university in person, I certainly don't regret going to university.
There have definitely been some arguments and debates on whether university courses are even worth the full £9,250 a year. I would probably agree. Students were definitely not prepared, especially last year when the intake happened in September. They were told that obviously some parts would be online, but they would still be able to sort of learn effectively. They'll be able to join in certain societies, etc. But then obviously COVID kept getting worse in the UK, and that wasn't possible. But students kind of feel like they've been left behind, that these issues haven't really been solved. They've just kind of been pushed to the side, and obviously completely understand the restrictions, but I think there needs to be more done about students and their experience, because they are paying a lot of money, they're getting into a lot of debt. Some students are just being left behind and lost in the system, and it's not at all fair, because they're there to learn, to gain experience, and to eventually get into their amazing careers and do some good in the world. And this is our future generation, and they're just being left behind.
In terms of the value of university, I think for me it hasn't really changed as much. And actually, in my opinion, the value of university has enhanced, because especially right now, the alternatives are very few and far between. So, for example, whether that be, let's say apprenticeships, quite a few apprenticeships have just been cancelled entirely. And job opportunities, internships have just been either switched entirely online or cancelled entirely. And I think university still provides that environment to have these really diverse experiences, which, especially at a time like this, that isn't available. The alternatives right now aren't really even as worth it, in my opinion. And in terms of the actual value of university, it'll always remain that university is such a unique environment, and this situation hopefully is temporary. So in the future, we'll be able to use not only the skills that we've learned online, but we can transfer those in person when everything goes back to normal. And we've had that collective experience that you won't really have anywhere else.
Students are frustrated that they are still expected to pay the full amounts of tuition fees, over £9,000, especially international students who actually have to pay more than UK students for their undergraduate degrees. And when there isn't access to the facilities, when there isn't face-to-face teaching, when all the lectures are pre-recorded for some students, it means that there isn't an opportunity to ask questions. And I spoke to Liam Byrne, the Birmingham MP, back in August, actually, about the standard of university education. And he emphasised that university is all about meeting new people and learning from other people. Those social interactions, those social discussions are harder to do over Zoom.
Is the value of my education right now $9,250, worth $9,250 a year? Simple answer is no. It is not. Unfortunately, the government has continued to ignore us university students the most. Everyone would agree with me on this when I say this is not the university experience we are paying for. They need to lower the tuition fees by at least half, because some people can't have access to the laboratories, some people can't have access to programs, some people can't even have access to the campus itself.
So many people are now calling for tuition fee refunds. There's been petitions started to reduce tuition fees from £9,000 to £3,000, and this petition has received hundreds of thousands of signatures. Still expected to pay full rent during this time. Students that are living in university-owned accommodations, such as halls, have been given full refunds at my university for the third lockdown period. However, students that are living in privately rental accommodation owned by landlords are still expected to pay the full rent because there's no breakout clause to rental contracts. Many students are annoyed that there is not going to be a no detriment policy. Last year, many universities across the UK implemented this safety net policy, which meant that students were unable to receive less than their working grade average because they didn't want students' results to be impacted by the disruption caused by the pandemic. And now, this year, many universities have not implemented this safety net. Bristol and Oxford have already announced that they will not be implementing the no detriment policy. And this safety net, I know I've spoken to people over the last few weeks, this would have just given them a bit of reassurance that all of those 3 years of studying we're not going to come down to a few months of disruption caused by the pandemic.
Okay, that's it in terms of the questions I want to ask them. Thank you all for being on Gen Z News Insider. You've given much value to students out there across the UK. But anyway, that's it from me on Gen Z News Insider this week. I've been Reza. See you next week.